the Maasai tribe. Oh, that's the blood? What it taste like though? Like Cinnamon Toast Crunch or something? Like cereal? Straight. We are here with the Maasai and we're about to do the jumping contest. Let's go. Higher. I'm higher than you, boy. So let's go, friend. Who next? I'm higher than you. Come on. Anybody to try beat?
It's a wonderful time. For those who do not know, IshowSpeed is a big YouTuber, live streamer from America, and he's in his early 20s. He's got about tens of millions of followers, in excess of 20 million or 50 million followers on all his platforms put together. And he's doing amazing work. Currently, he's shining the light on Africa by going through different countries, different cities, different cultures in Africa. He's been to Kenya, he's been to South Africa, he's been to Eswatini, he's been to Zimbabwe. And what he's doing is he's interacting with the people, interacting with the culture, you know, doing challenges with different warriors and everything like the one we just saw now, where he was challenging the Kenyan warriors. But the beautiful thing about what he's doing is that he's bringing so much attention to the true, real African reality, the real African story. What that has done is that his followers back at home in America and all over the world are now seeing, especially those ones outside Africa, are seeing for the very first time through the lenses of IshowSpeed, the reality of Africa, that Africa is not the ugly, gory, helpless space and corrupt place. Yes, a little bit corrupt, but not really that helpless, uncivilized space they've been made to believe by the by the Western media, by the Western narratives, by the Western education that they got. And so you see a lot of reactions. I'm going to play one or two of those now. A lot of reactions about, oh, I'm just seeing this about Africa for the first time. We've been lied to. The motherland is beautiful. This is not what we thought Africa is about. This is not what we're taught about Africa. This is not the Africa we had in our mind. This is not the Africa. And some of them were actually in tears.
Man, this whole time, bro, they made us fucking think Africa was such a poor country, bro. Such a place you wouldn't want to be at, bro. And Speed is single-handedly changing my perspective on life. Like the music in Africa, the culture, everything, every single aspect of Africa just makes my insides feel so good, bro.
We are fighting a bigger war here. We are fighting a bigger adversary here. The Western media and the Western sentiment about what Africa should be perceived as opposed to what Africa truly is. This reminds me of the words of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie in her famous TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. She argues that the problem with a single story is not the fact that it is false. It is the fact that it is incomplete and often one-sided. And so it robs people of their dignity, it flattens their complexities and their nuances, and then it turns human beings into stereotypes. So Africa has been trapped in a single story for decades, a story of hunger, dependency, crisis, corrupt leaders, poverty, and, you know, the list goes on. And when that is the only story that the world consumes, it becomes the Africa that they know. Now, this single story did not appear by accident. During colonialism, Africa was portrayed as dark, empty, primitive, in need of control, in need of civilization. This narrative was necessary because exploitation requires moral justification. Think about this. If Africa was seen as advanced, organized, and intelligent, colonization would have looked like theft. But if Africa had been portrayed or was portrayed like it was, like helpless, primitive, and hopeless and backward, then colonization would look like the necessary civilization that Africa needs. After independence, the narrative simply shifted. Now, Africa became the failed continent, the aid-dependent continent, the corrupt continent, the problem to be managed. Western media inherited this kind of narrative and then just refined it. Let's be honest. Western media does not do justice to African image. It doesn't show Africa in its finest. Africa only shows up in the media, in the Western media, when there is famine, when there is a war, when there's crisis, when there's a political insurrection, or there's a coup, something bad. Meanwhile, African innovations are underreported. Their cities are ignored. African middle classes are invisible. African joy is dismissed as unexpected. Now, this selective storytelling is not the neutral journalism they would have us believe. It is curated perception, and perception is power. Let us dismantle the single story with facts. Nollywood produces more films annually than Hollywood. Afrobeat artists like Wizkid, Davido, and the rest of them, they dominate global charts and they shape global pop culture. African fashion weeks like the Lagos Fashion Week influence Paris, Milan, and London. Yet Africa is framed as culturally behind. Now let's talk about technology and innovations. Lagos, Nairobi, and Cape Town are major startup hubs. Kenya and M-Pesa revolutionized mobile banking before Silicon Valley even paid attention. African developers build solutions for real-world problems, finance, tech, real estate, infrastructure, energy, name it. However, innovation from Africa is labeled informal or local, never global. Even in governance, where it is really not our strong point, we are scoring quite high. I was watching a video recently, just yesterday, where Vusi Tembekwaye, someone I respect so much, was talking about what to watch out for in 2026. And the country he rated highest from all his travels in 2025 and all the countries he's been in and all the things he's seen was Ghana. He talks about Ghana's economy, Ghana's policy, foreign policy, talking about Ghana's development generally. And Botswana has been politically stable for so long, for decades now. But African governance is always framed as chaos and corrupt. And guess what? When those corrupt leaders, the corrupt ones, when they steal their money, where do they take it to? Where do they buy properties? They buy it in the West and they store this money in the West. Now, let us talk about a reality we rarely discuss. Without Africa, the modern West, the global North, is going to struggle to survive. Currently, Africa supplies over 70% of the world's cobalt, which is critical for the creation of smartphones, renewable energy, all the smart solutions we're seeing all around. Large portions of lithium, manganese, platinums, and rare earth are gotten from Africa. The global food chain will hardly be a chain without Africa's supply, because we supply very key products in that food chain, in that whole complex arrangement. Talk about human labor through migration and intellectual contribution. You know, I always tell people that, why do you think that Africa, as corrupt as we are and as corrupt and helpless as we are painted, the West constantly opens their border when they have problems to us to come and solve their problems? They get the brightest, smartest minds from Africa, bring them over to come and solve their community problems. And then when they are done with that, they start putting in, ways of strengthening our borders, closing down borders and immigration policies to tighten the news, so that the African you pulled out of his home, that you have refused to allow him develop Africa, would now have to go back, sometimes empty-handed. The world's smartphone, the electric cars, the renewable energy transitions all depend on Africa. Yet, Africa is portrayed as a burden to be saddled and not as a contributor. Unfortunately, this contradiction is intentional. A continent that is seen as weak is easier to exploit. The single story of Africa serves economic and political interests. It justifies unequal trade relationships, resource extraction without fair price, political interference in sovereign states, aid system that maintains dependency rather than development. So pity is profitable, equality is destructive. This is why images of starving children, dying families, burning houses are recycled endlessly in the Western media, because it evokes emotions and not respect. Unfortunately, the most devastating effect of this narrative is internal. When Africa consistently consumes a single story about themselves, confidence erodes over time, dependency will feel normal, ambitions are going to shrink, and standards will drop. This is what Chimamanda just warns about. The single story does not only disrupt and misinform the world, it colonizes the mind. For me, reforming Africa is not only about infrastructure or policy, it's about narrative sovereignty. Africa must invest in African media platforms, fund African historians, filmmakers, journalists to tell the African story. Africa has to control its data, research, and archives, teach African histories and African perspectives, and finally export stories and not just raw materials. This is important because development without narrative control is incomplete. There's an African proverb that I love so much that sums this idea. It says, until the lion learns how to write, the tales will always favor the hunter. Until Africa learns how to tell its own story, the tales will always favor the West. Africa has been hunted, but the hunter is telling the story in his own favor. It is time now for the lion to write. We must own our story, and we must rewrite the script. A big thank you to IshowSpeed for what he's done and what he's doing. However, IshowSpeed did not reveal a new Africa. He's only revealing a hidden one. Africa does not need permission to exist. It doesn't need validation to matter. But respect requires structure. Visibility requires strategy, and power requires ownership. The world will not unlearn the lies it's been told overnight. Africa must do the work and replace those lies with the reality of Africa. It is important for Africa to get it right, and we will get it right.